The Apostle John, same name, different person, wrote about Jesus' gift of love. My dear friends, we must love each other. Love comes from God, and when we love each other, it shows that we have been given new life. We are now God's children, and we know God. God is love, and anyone who doesn't love others has never known God. God showed love for us when God sent Jesus into the world to give us life. Real love isn't our love for God, but God's love for us. Dear friends, since God loved us this much, we must love each other.
Luke 21, verses 25 to 36. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. He told them this parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. I tell you the truth. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with dissipation, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life. And that day will close on you unexpectedly like a trap, for it will come upon all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch, and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man.
Lord, may your word live within us and bear much fruit to your glory. The readings set down for this first Sunday of Advent probably seem as un-Christmassy as you can get. They've got much more of an earth-shattering end about the world and all things going on within it, especially in Luke's Gospel. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for powers of heaven will be shaken. Now, when these things take place, stand up, raise your heads high, because your redemption is drawing near. Anguish, perplexity, terror, roaring and tossing sea, heavenly bodies shaken. It reads more to me like it's coming off the pages of a Hollywood script for some macabre horror movie, the sort that I usually make it my absolute business to avoid at all costs. But how do you respond when you are seriously terrified? What is Jesus' suggestion? When you see these things begin to take place, stand up, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. This time, when these things begin to happen, when you see your world begin to fall apart and you become terrified, this is not a time for playing safe. It's a time for standing tall, for sticking your neck out. This is a time to seize the day, because this time of horror and darkness is not one that comes to destroy you. even though it feels like it does. Understand the signs and the seasons, says John. For God does not come as the abuser or the oppressor or the invader. Rather, this is a time that will bring about your liberation, our freedom, our hope. Unchristmassy, perhaps, but I think today's gospel has a lot to say about anticipation and expectation. Perhaps the reason today's readings seem un-Christmas related is because even our own concept of Christmas has itself broken loose from its moorings and become something other than what's actually in the gospel. These words about traumatic chaos, chaos that shakes the earth, should be sounding very different to this generation, not because it's new, but because it is so real. When the people in churches in Samoa and Japan hear these words today, nations will be confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. They will hear them particularly poignantly. Tsunamis are not new, neither are earthquakes or cyclones or even bushfires. They are not new, but our generation has an understanding of why they are becoming more frequent, more violent, more extreme. We can see that they are not just isolated incidents, but that there is an escalating pattern. The climate is changing. The extremes are more violent, and we know that we have helped to bring that on as well. But knowing how to face it and what to do about it is a completely different thing. You see, the prospect of actually changing ourselves can be more traumatic than enduring the change that goes on all around us. Even those things that seem completely out of control. It can be more traumatic, more perplexing, more anxiety-ridden, trying to change ourselves and our own behaviour than the world around us. We see a world that is in many ways hell-bent in some quarters to build fear and shatter hope and destroy love. It can leave us terrified. That's exactly why we call them terrorists, because they work on terror. And it's so easy for us to get caught up in that. But what we're called to do is something quite different, unexpected, overturning, challenging our expectations. Everything that Jesus is on about is so different from the way our world operates that it makes the kind of changes needed to halt the progress of climate change look like small potatoes. It makes what it will require to overcome terror seem so minimal compared with the ways in which the hope, the love, and the promise that Jesus brings. It will seem incredibly easy just to give in than to find our lives transformed by those events. Christmas is not about a little baby in a manger, although that becomes our focus. It's about God breaking into our world in a way we would never ever expect, of having our world overturned. But we've turned it into something safe and secure, all wrapped up like Christmas gifts, all wrapped up in tinsel and piled under a tree, designed to tone it all down and make it seem far less radical than what it really is. Our reading this morning reminds us that as Jesus comes into our world, kingdoms will crumble, empires will fall, great political parties will tear themselves asunder, financial systems will even go into meltdown, powerful nations will be mired in senseless, unwinnable wars, the earth will be shaken to its foundations. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But it doesn't sound like what we would expect at Christmas. Well, perhaps it should. But I always find it interesting that all of our lovely cards by Hallmark and others have the story of Christ coming into our world reduced to a cute baby story. We don't ever see those earth-shattering images on the front of our cards. Can you imagine sending out your Christmas cards with kingdoms falling, empires at war with one another, financial systems in meltdown? I've never found a card like that. Maybe we wouldn't want to send it like that. But we've got to remember that the story actually created a whole lot of anxiety that foreshadowed the chaos and trauma that his coming into the world was going to cause. The shepherds and the wise men are popular stories. But who wants to hear about the reigning dictator who went ballistic and dispatched the death squads to kill all the babies to make sure that this baby would not have a chance to shake the earth to its foundations? We certainly don't get that one on Christmas cards. Social psychologists say that one of the ways that we react to threatening news, especially news that we feel powerless to do anything about, is to ignore it, to suppress it from consciousness so that we become oblivious to it. And one of the ways that we love to do that is to distract ourselves with entertainment and consumption and festivities and intoxicants. In other words, we just simply party ourselves into oblivion. And what did Jesus say in the reading we heard? Be on your guard, so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life. Do not be worried about these things, that day might catch you unexpected like a trap. In other words, compulsive partying and mind-numbing intoxication and keeping up with the lifestyle indicators that were constantly put before us and going around constantly socialising in festive consumption is not really what it's all about. In our prayers of confession at this time of the year, we acknowledge that we are prone, all of us, are prone to reducing our preparation for Christ's coming into reckless expense and triviality. It's no wonder. It's not difficult to get caught up in, is it? It's not difficult to get caught up in that massive wave of consumption and partying that engulfs our world at this time of year. But Jesus says, be on your guard. Now, let me be frank here. I don't think that he's saying you can't go to parties or buy Christmas presents, but he is warning against doing so mindlessly and just surrendering to the escapism of it all. You see, the Christmas we anticipate and prepare for is not just the festivities that celebrate the birth of a baby. I mean, the baby is a very important part of the story, but the usual tendency is to freeze it there, in that manger, and allow nothing that would disrupt the sentimentality and festive feel of it. But you see, the Christmas we actually anticipate and prepare for is much more than that. It's like the beginning of the end. It's like the breaking in of a new world which will shake the earth to its foundations and bring many of its cherished institutions crashing down. For the affirmation of God comes through the ages. Your redemption is at hand. Keep watching for the shafts of light across the eastern sky. Even amid the anguish of the world's Gethsemane, watch and pray. For God is more present in our God-forsaken anguish than we can ever comprehend. Place your hope in God, our reading reminds us. Seek God's ways and follow them. This is a season. This Advent season is a time for honest, honest to goodness wrestling with God. A season for bringing to God the great intercessions that we need to for the peace and justice and hope of our world. It is a season not to cow down, but to stand tall, to lift up our heads. The Christmas we anticipate and prepare for is the celebration of a God who becomes flesh in the fragile promise of a baby yet to be born, but also whose birthing labour pains causes the whole world to shudder and heave. For what is being born is not just a baby, but a new world, a new culture, a new way of being. What is being born is life itself. Freedom, hope, and healing is what is being born. What is being born is a new day of justice when all the world is set free from its enemies and salvation is made known. And for the coming of that day, we hold our head high and together we walk into the future with hope. Amen.